this is your bike. As if that isn't enough, there's a Studhaus version with a 502 cubic inch big block. It'll cost you $39,200. Owners like Eddie Paul report that the Boss Hoss is a carefully crafted, reliable ride. In a word, it's a motorcycle. But what classification of vehicle is this? For decades, it was the Loch Ness Monster of motorcycles. Nothing to prove it was real, but a handful of sightings and a single photograph.
Disbelief. And I thought it was just a prank that somebody had gotten a bunch of old parts together and made something to stage a photo.
Still, publisher and collector Buzz Walneck set out to determine whether the monster was real. He ran an ad in his own magazine.
And it was about 2 weeks later, a phone rang and Helen says, Buzz, the hair on the back of your neck is going to stand up because somebody called and they know where it's at.
Amazingly, Walneck learned that there were not one, but two of the bikes, the one in the photograph and this one, a later copy, which he added to his collection.
Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. It looked like a brand new Indian, it looked like a brand new Harley.
Road Dog, the bikes were called, by their builder, William Wild Bill Gelbke.
I'd heard that he'd put on about 20,000 miles in 1 year on the Road Dog, just traveling the country. Get on the road and ride.
That Road Dog, the original, is now owned by Anthony Shablik of Green Bay, Wisconsin. Each bike weighs 3,280 pounds and is powered by an early 60s four-cylinder Chevy Iron Duke engine. You can't just lean a 1.5-ton bike on a kickstand. Wild Bill's solution was to place hydraulic rams at the four corners of the machine. The frame is a piece of industrial art, welded from aircraft tubing.
One piece of pipe that's been turned and twisted and bent outward, curved up, comes around, goes, and comes around all the way to the bottom.
The beer cans are also standard equipment. They keep road debris out of the hollow fork tubes. And what's it like to ride a Road Dog? This one's all but retired from the street, due in part to an ill-fated road test by motorcycle journalist John Burns.
Most bikes, you kind of start off and get your balance and you might dab with your foot a couple times, but that one, if you dab with your foot, it'll break off your leg. So you just kind of have to twist the throttle and pick up your feet at the same time and just go, which is fine as long as you don't have to turn or anything.
And sure enough, when Burns tried to turn, Road Dog crashed.
John was fine. We were able to push and pull and get the bike out of the mud. And no real damage was done, but the day of testing was over and not really much was said on the way home.
I said, thanks for coming, John. And I said, thanks for letting me ride the Road Dog Buzz, and got on the airplane as fast as I could and got back out of there.
Only one man seemed to be able to ride Road Dog, its late creator. Wild Bill Gelbke was gunned down in 1978 by police after allegedly shooting at an officer. So it's unrideable, and it's cobbled together from car parts. Is it a motorcycle? Perhaps not, except in the sense that it's a maverick machine built by a garage tinkerer. This trait is something that runs through the history of motorcycling, from William Harley to Soichiro Honda. Next, the secret history of the motorcycle, or how it went from utilitarian transportation to coveted boys' toy. Among more than 100 exotic, eccentric, and historic machines at the Guggenheim Museum's recent motorcycle exhibit was this spindly two-wheeler, dating from 1868.
When I was researching the art of the motorcycle, it was important to me that I found the first motorcycle. Micho, a bicycle maker, Perro, an engineer, and they designed and patented the very first motorcycle. It still exists. We found it and we put it in the exhibition.
Like all motorcycles, it's a time machine, taking us back to 1860s France. The velocipede, or pedal bicycle, had been invented in 1861. It quickly became all the rage of the French aristocracy, who were perhaps the first celebrity bikers. For the wildly popular sport of bicycle racing, a fast pace machine was needed. And so Pierre Michaud fitted a small industrial steam engine into one of his velocipedes. At full steam, the contraption was good for about 19 miles an hour. But while the bicycle is an obvious progenitor of the motorcycle, there are others. One of which isn't a machine at all.
In very simple terms, a motorcycle is a mechanical horse.
The kinship between biker and horseman is bred into the machine. It's most apparent in the way the particular riding positions have carried over, from horse to motorcycle.
Americans have Western saddles. They stick their feet forward and they don't use their feet very much for commands. In Europe, it's completely different. You ride your horses in what's called an English saddle, and so you're very much upright and with your heels underneath you because you use the feet a lot more to command the horse.
On an American cruiser, the rider is feet forward in a classic cowboy slouch. The European or Japanese sport bike rider is in a racing tuck, like a jockey. Geography also had a hand in the design of motorcycles. For the twisting lanes of Europe, there was a premium on lightweight and sure handling. But the broad landscapes of America fathered the Harley-Davidson and the Indian Chief, highway cruisers with large displacement, low-revving engines.
I've tried to explain that a few times to English friends of mine. They say, you know, why are Harleys the way they are? Why aren't they sportier? American bikes were really built to take people across big open spaces without causing too much trouble. The English built very sporting, smaller, lighter bikes that were fun on the roads of England.
By the turn of the 20th century in America, the machine with a bicycle lineage and cowboy attitude was the hottest thing on the road. Or what passed for the road.
There were cart tracks, horse tracks, goat paths, and a motorcycle traversed those roads, quote unquote, better than any four-wheel car. A motorcycle was also more powerful because it had less weight to carry. And there were big contracts for police, postal carriers, linemen. They all used motorcycles because they could get to where they needed to go. Cars got stuck. Cars were more unreliable, mainly because they had 4 times as many parts as the average motorcycle.
America's first production motorcycle came out in 1902. The so-called Camelback Indian, co-invented by Oscar Hedstrom, went places no other vehicle could.
There was this famous hill. Up comes Oscar riding this thing, and he just zooms up this hill. And then he comes back down, and he goes up halfway, he stops, he starts and takes off again on the hill. And the press had never seen anything like this. An Indian was made in a day.
While the Camelback proved a bike could climb, Glenn Curtis showed it could go flat out fast. In 1907, the then unknown tinkerer shoehorned a V8 dirigible motor into a handmade frame and sent the rickety machine loose on the sand flats at Daytona.
And they clocked him at 136 miles an hour. And you look at this thing, it has, you know, tires like your thumb, no suspension, no brakes. And here is the boy inventor climbing on this thing and doing 136 miles an hour.
No vehicle of any kind would surpass his speed record until 1911. Curtis went on to build a production V-twin motorcycle. And later, of course, he made aviation history with the Curtis Jenny. For the spectacle of speed, however, there was nothing like board track racing. This rare film gives a glimpse into the extreme sport of its day. Most race bikes of the time were pedal started. But board trackers were geared so high for top speed that they had to be towed to start. They had no throttles. Once up to speed, the bikes ran wide open at upwards of 120 miles an hour around a steeply banked wooden track. No brakes either. You slowed down by hitting a kill switch or by throwing your machine into a controlled skid. Just how dangerous all this was became clear on September 8, 1912. Newark, New Jersey. This picture was taken just before it happened. An instant later, the lead rider, Eddie Hasha, lost control. A period diagram shows the path of the bike as it slammed into the guardrail, killing 4 spectators, then ricocheted back onto the track, killing a rider. Board track champion Hasha also died. The horrific accident made headlines. The first time that motorcycles were featured on the front page of the New York Times. The next year, the motorcycle was lampooned in Collier's magazine. Don't you know you can get the same sensations by tying firecrackers to your legs and sitting over an oil heater? The cartoon read. As for the workings of those controls and gauges, which have always baffled non-bikers, Collier said, you brake with your right hand, work the clutch with your left, and keep track of your oil and gasoline and electricity with the rest of your hands. But by then, the real argument against motorcycles had appeared, in the form of the Tin Lizzie. Henry Ford's Model T had first appeared in 1909. Soon you could drive a car on a motorcycle budget. By 1915, some 2 million people had opted for 4 wheels. And finally, there was good news about those bad old roads.
They'd learned how to build cement roadways. So both the infrastructure and the car got better and cheaper. And that really relegated motorcycles to sort of recreation and even luxury status.
It brought ruin to the motorcycle industry. In 1910, there had been about 150 companies making bikes in America. Almost all of them were put out of business by the Model T. Yet in a sense, the motorcycle had been liberated. They didn't need to be all that practical anymore. Once you might have chosen a bike for cheap transportation, but now you rode it just because.
The thrill of speed. And the thrill of the speed of a motorcycle is to do with the fact that the wind is in your face.
You are not in a motorcycle, you are on a motorcycle. You are not going through the countryside, you are in the countryside. When it rains, you get wet. When it's sunny, you get warm. When there's somebody cutting grass, you smell that. In a motorcycle, you are moving across a nation and you feel like it.
The cowboy connection again. Some people just crave the freedom of the saddle. But back in the 1920s, if you chose to ride, your choices continued to dwindle. During the 20s, Excelsior Henderson was one of the big 3 American motorcycle companies. The Super X and its oversized Springer front suspension was a favorite of racers and the police. Until the Great Depression came along.
The most direct effect, immediate effect, was that Excelsior Henderson went out of business. That was owned by Mr. Schwinn of Schwinn bicycle fame. And he looked at the tea leaves, the financial tea leaves, and he called a meeting and he said, gentlemen, today we stop production.
With Excelsior Henderson out of the picture, there were only 2 companies left. In the long run,